if I can quote in English,
It's clear that the text is divergent from our original proposal in a number of important areas. Where the adoption of our proposal would have resulted in an almost complete harmonization in this area, the compromise text represents only a partial harmonization. Wir regeln die Vorratsdatensprechung nicht abschließend, wie sich das...
So I'm just wondering how we can evaluate that. What we've done is to give the member states a framework that goes beyond the 2002 directive. I don't think we have reached the level that we should be at in European legislation. I think there's also the aspect of the future powers of this Parliament. A press bulletin from the Socialist Group says
Dossiers in this area will be treated on the basis of co-decision with Parliament, including the revision of the present directive. Für Letzteres trifft es zu. Aber das
That's true for the latter aspect. But as regards fighting terrorism, I have my doubts about that. And Ireland wants to go to the ECJ on the question of competence. I'm very disappointed about the agreement between the two big groups. After 8 weeks of intensive negotiations, we budged a lot in terms of compromises, but the way in which an agreement was reached on something which had not officially been agreed upon in Council, I think was incorrect. I'm disappointed, that's correct, but I look forward to tomorrow's vote, and I would still like to work together in a cooperative spirit. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup à notre...
Thank you to the rapporteur. Now we have the rapporteur. We have Mr. Raoul, who is going to speak on behalf of the ITRE committee. You have 4 minutes.
Herr Präsident,
President, Commissioner, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. People expect from us that we don't just fight about circumstances and situations, but sort the situations out as quickly as possible. People expect, especially from European policy, that in questions of fighting organised crime and fighting terrorism, that we don't just keep adopting resolutions and don't keep having fights about it, but come up with results. That was our problem. Here we have a possible instrument for improving the situation, that is to say, data retention. It is of course not a panacea, but it is a means to an end. We had a problem. We could tie it in with people's fears. People's fears, they wanted to have their own data protected. Citizens didn't want their own situation to be badly affected. Now, it shouldn't be some sort of endless discussion. We wanted a fast result, and I think people have the right to fast results. That's why, Mr. Alvaro, I think it was our obligation to find a solution, even in a very short space of time. I want to say this quite openly. It's a result which isn't perfect, but which now helps us. Helps policemen, gives them instruments which they didn't have before, and at the same time it does everything we can to protect people and to protect their own information. The Council wouldn't have made any progress. This would have gone on forever. It would have been a framework decision and an ongoing dispute. The Parliament asked lots of questions. You described this correctly, colleague. The Council didn't want to move. Then the Commission came up with a proposal which perhaps made a little bit of a step towards something of a compromise. Now we have a result which only came about because the Parliament ceded ground and because we tried to bring together different political forces. That much is true. We also won in the sense that we dealt with this all under co-decision. Now, as to whether this would have happened anyway or not is not of any interest. At the end of 2005, we see the conclusion of this project, and therefore it can start being effective. I say yes to the instrument, no to an arbitrary collation of data. I say yes to the limited conditions which we have established. It's not all types of data, not all data is retainable. Very little on the internet, for example. Only in countries that already have the provisions can we retain data on failed calls, for example. We have reduced the requirements. The minimum time period is to be 6 months. I think that is open for further discussion. 24 as a possible extension of the period. Mr. Alvaro raised another question. I'd like to have an answer. Mr. Frattini, Commissioner Frattini, in the discussion said that what is being talked about in Poland 15 years is not something which can possibly be implemented. I can't imagine getting that, but I would like to have a response from Mr. Clark as to his views on this. Now, on the costs, we didn't want the regulation which I would have wanted, but the question of costs is not as relevant as it was at the start of the project, because some of this data didn't even exist at that stage. When the situation changes, of course, we have to impose different conditions. The question of costs has altered in the meantime. In data protection, we have achieved a great deal. We have achieved a huge amount in terms of safety for people and avoiding the misuse of data. Everything Mr. Alvaro has put forward was achieved together. It was a very difficult path, but now it will hopefully be decided upon tomorrow. People will be protected from misuse of their own personal data. They can't, and that these measures will only be taken when it comes to serious crime, organised crime and so on. And the Parliament wants to keep hold of the reins. No, we don't want comitology and revision after 2 years. My last sentence. Police has new opportunities and citizens have new possibilities for data protection. We have increased our influence in Parliament, I think. People have the right to provide protect their information while enabling the police to fight against crime. Thank you. Mrs. Sederschiöld, who will speak as shadow as the author of the opinion.
President, democracy and freedom, that isn't something you can defend if you limit human rights. We must protect the civil rights of our citizens, but we can't do it in this way. This legislation offends those things we should protect. We need an independent evaluation of this before this legislation comes into force. This is not something we should take lightly. We won't protect ourselves against terrorism if we just limit human rights and civil rights. This directive, under Article 95, we mustn't damage people's trust in the EU, and we'll do that if we don't protect the rule of law and civil rights. If we can't justify this being necessary, we could force the member states to vote against their own constitutions, and we could have a constitutional crisis in connection with this proposal. It is necessary to ensure rights within our treaties before we go too far in the wrong direction. One might feel hate for terrorists, but to limit freedoms, we should protect our integrity. We mustn't destroy our data protection, because this is a European right that we can be proud of and ought to hold on to.
Thank you. We have now the speakers for the political groups. Mrs. Clam for the EPP. 2 minutes.
Thank you, President. Minister, Vice President of the Commission, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow we shall be deciding on an important European instrument to fight terrorism and most serious forms of crime. Now, we've had a framework decision concerning the appropriate directive, and now the Commission's proposal involves co-decision for the Parliament. Just like the Member States in the Council, we have very different